right, that was quite the workout. Thank you all for being here tonight. It's my great privilege to be here. First concert for me, first concert actually for a lot of our students as well. It's also the last year for several of our students. So before I continue, I didn't tell them that I would do this, but I think it'd be pretty special if we ask all of the new students if they would please stand so you can acknowledge them. New students, freshmen. And at the end of the school year and also at the end of the semester, some of our students will be graduating. If they can please stand as well. Friends, thank you for supporting this concert, and we really hope they enjoy the rest of our performance.
Making sure this thing's on. Hi, everyone. How are we doing tonight? So glad you could come. My name is Jelena Harris. I'm a senior currently studying music education, so I will be graduating at the end of spring next semester. And now we are moving into the first suite in E-flat. This piece is a legendary place in Wind Ensemble in the wind band world, written in 1909. It's often considered one of the very first major works written specifically for modern concert band instrumentation, one that continues to influence composers today. The first movement, Chaconne, is based on an old Baroque form built over a repeating bass line. You'll hear this bass line right at the beginning in the tubas and euphoniums. Holst uses that theme to create 15 short variations, each with its own energy and character. The entire piece is built from the opening 3 notes, E-flat, F, and B-flat, which appear in every movement in some way. Holst even flips those notes upside down at times, creating a more reflective, sometimes even melancholy sound before returning to a brighter mood. The second movement, Intermezzo, is a playful, energetic, and full of rhythmic surprises. It constantly starts and stops in unexpected ways. In the middle, you'll hear a beautiful lyrical melody in the clarinet that adds contrast before the lively opening material returns to bring the movement to a cheerful loose. The final movement, March, begins with a bold trill in the woodwinds and a burst of sound from the brass and percussion. It's spirited and humorous, filled with sudden accents and playful interruptions. Near the end, Holst briefly recalls themes from the first 2 movements before finishing the work in a triumphant and joyful conclusion. I hope you guys enjoy.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Madeline, and I am a junior saxophone performance major here at the University of Redlands. And thank you. The next piece we are playing is Vincent Persichetti's Symphony for Band, and it was commissioned and premiered by Clark Mitts and the Washington University Band at the MENC convention in St. Louis on April 16th of 1956. So it was originally supposed to be called the Symphony for Winds, since Persichetti had just written his Symphony Number 5 for strings, but he decided he wanted to go with the word band specifically because band didn't have as good of a reputation as orchestral music did, and people saw it as less serious. So he wanted to change that perception, which is why he used the word band specifically. And man, did he change that perception, because actually a music critic, a music scholar, called it bold and original, and it actually changed the way that composers wrote for bands. There are 4 movements in this piece: Adagio Allegro, Adagio Sostenuto, Allegro, and Vivace. And we are going to be playing the second movement for you tonight. The second movement is actually based on one of his own hymns called Round Me Falls the Night, from his Hymns and Responses for the Church Year. So I hope that you all enjoy Vincent Persichetti's Symphony for Band. Thank you.
So we happen to have quite a fabulous composition studio here. So we had the privilege of working with one of our very own, our professor of composition here, Dr. Anthony Suter. And I would like to welcome him here wherever he is so he can talk a little bit about the following piece. Thank you.
If only I got that. I promise you I don't get this welcome at 8 o'clock theory class on Tuesdays. But so I just want to start off on behalf of the faculty, just publicly and formally welcoming Dr. Santos to the University of Redlands. We are so thrilled to have him as a colleague. And to be working with him and for the opportunity to work with the group and to work on this piece. So there's a couple of things that are really interesting coincidences about this piece. This group in 2009 was actually the first ensemble to ever play this piece. It was commissioned by a consortium of schools in the Austin area from which I came when I came to Redlands in 2008. And we wanted to make a reference recording for the schools that had commissioned the piece. And so here we are in 2025, and this group is playing it again, which is really great. So as you may have read in the program notes, if you can see well enough to read them, I couldn't with my eyes. But this piece is a memorial to a legendary Austin area middle school band director by the name of Diane Goretzky. Who left us in the early 2000s after a long battle with cancer. And so her colleagues in the area put together this consortium commission where every school puts in a little bit of money to commission a piece in her honor. And I was selected for this commission. And I wanted to write a piece that was really a celebration of Diane, and not only of Diane, but of all the students that she taught and she inspired. So that's sort of where the title comes from, because that's what great teachers do. They spark in us our better angels, our passion for music, and every single person on this stage is here because a teacher did that for them at some point. That they inspired them to pursue this as a vocation. And so this is really, in the largest sense, sort of a piece that's about gratitude for the wonderful teachers in our lives and all of our pasts and the wonderful teachers that we have that we're training here to send out into the world. And so I love this piece in a way that I don't love other pieces because of that. So a couple things that you're going to hear in the piece. Diane was a horn player, so there's a beautiful horn solo in the middle, and there's this wonderful musical universal coincidence that happened. I actually asked for wind chimes, not the sort of percussion orchestral wind chimes, but like the normal backdoor kind of wind chimes. And you'll hear them behind the horn solo. And when I gave the score to the band directors in Austin that knew Diane well, they were sort of overcome because when they had visited her in the last few months of her life, she often had the patio slider of her room open on the nice days, and she had just sets and sets of wind chimes that were always sort of chiming. And I didn't know that, but somehow that made it into the piece behind the horn solo that is sort of, Diane's voice sort of singing to all of us. So I hope you enjoy the piece, and thank you so much for working on it and bringing it to life, and thank you all for being here.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Amanda Paz, and I'm currently in the music education program here at the U of R. Huapango, composed by Jose Pablo Moncayo, is one of the most famous and beloved pieces of Mexican concert music. The huapango itself is a lively Mexican dance with Spanish roots, especially popular in the regions along the Gulf of Mexico. It features a mix of rhythms, duple and triple meters, that mirror the quick, intricate steps of the dancers. Traditionally, it's performed by singers and ensembles that can range from 2 guitars to a full mariachi band. In this dance, the men sing while the women dance, often on a wooden platform that adds a percussive sound to the music. Moncayo wrote Huapango in 1941, drawing inspiration from 3 authentic folk songs, Siqui Siri, Balahu, and El Gavilan. The piece is organized in 3 main sections, energetic at the beginning and end, with a slower, more lyrical middle section. The lively outer sections capture the spirit of the traditional coplas, where 2 male singers trade verses back and forth. Moncayo represents this musical dialogue with playful exchanges between the trombones and trumpets. Huapango bursts with color, rhythm, and energy, celebrating the richness of Mexican folk tradition. The French composer Darius Milhaud once said that when he wanted sun in his apartment on a gray Paris day, he would listen to Moncayo's Huapango.